Welcome back to the Aphrodisia channel. I am Aphrodisia. We have a bit of a new look for you today. A girl has been trying her graphic design chops, and we are always trying to level up this channel so it is always as amazing as it can be for you. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that has been hot in the press and very close to my heart. Today we are talking about immigration. And immigration for me is quite personal because I am what you would call a professional immigrant. I have lived in not one, not two, but 3 countries in my life, and I'm probably going to live in another one. So when I'm seeing immigration being talked about and represented in the media, I feel like there's a little bit of humanity lacking.
If you come to our country illegally, this is one of the consequences you could face. First of all, do not come to our country illegally. You will be removed and you will be prosecuted.
So today we're going to get to the bottom of that.
Meanwhile,
if you have a skin color other than white or speak a language other than English, the immigration police today got permission from the Supreme Court and Donald Trump to arrest you, throw you in jail for a couple days, and check on your citizenship and green card.
Let's be honest, he's a racist. He doesn't like black or brown people coming into the United States.
We're going to clean up our cities. We're going to clean them up so they don't kill 5 people every weekend.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
DHS, they say that they're going after the worst of the worst, that they're going after gang members, violent offenders, and murderers.
They managed to silence us for 20 years with labels. Racist, Islamophobe, far right. They don't work anymore.
You either fight back or you die.
You sound insane.
So what level are you willing to fight to get your guys' freedom of speech?
To death! To death! I will die for freedom of speech. I've already proved this. I've been to Afghanistan. Charlie Kirk's death. If that wasn't something, I don't know what is. Charlie Kirk's death. He says, how do we get to the point? That's the point.
Have you lost your damn mind? A lot of the people who are coming in, I don't want to be too harsh on them, but they have a completely different set of values, and they seem to want to impose their way of life from where they are from on us.
Oh, no.
One thing that's certainly happened is more and more sexual assaults, I think, are becoming apparent. There's also a huge increase in gang violence, and it seems like the police seem scared to counteract this.
Muslims were just savagely attacked in the United Kingdom by 20+ white men.
Are we losing our identity?
They are protesting against migrants to get them out of their country, but at the same time they are in the queue to get some onion bhaji and chicken tikka. Just wow, stick to your fish and chips please.
It was disgusting. See my little kids here, I wore that Aboriginal flag to show solidarity. March as one, together. And look what these idiots have done.
For Australia, not Kosovo.
When did it become hatred to want to prioritize your own country? And when did it become racist to be a patriot?
My 2 little girls cry over a bunch of shit.
Indigenous activists have condemned anyone who walked with native after being forced to defend camp sovereignty, having splintered off from the larger anti-migration March for Australia rally.
Drastically cutting migration wouldn't protect Australia. It would tank our economy.
And on immigration, you better get your act together. You're not going to have Europe anymore. And you got to stop this horrible invasion.
We're taught to see immigration or migration as a war, a battle between those who belong and those who don't. On one side, the images, brown faces behind bars, bodies in boats, families split apart, refugees penned into camps. On the other, raids disguised as protection, neo marches dressed up as patriotism, borders sharpened into weapons, culture turned into a battlefield, politicians joking about Haitians eating dogs.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets.
Protesters with torches chanting, "You will not replace us." Immigration isn't narrated as movement or survival or history. It's narrated as invasion. Winners and losers, insiders and outsiders. And lately, that story has grown louder. Trump's crackdowns, illegal flashing across news tickers, ICE raids that feel more like abductions.
Demonstrators tries to form a human blockade at a San Francisco immigration court today, trying to stop ICE agents as they attempt to move detainees from a courthouse to a waiting van. They shoved their way through the protesters and pushed their detainee into the van.
Deportation turned into content.
Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. And right now, you can save £50 per person. That's £200 off for a family of 4. Book now with Jet2 Holidays.
In LA, there have been reports of censored protests in support of migrants.
So this protest has been going on for 2 weeks already. And it's still going on today, August 8th. There has been no news on it, no TikTok videos on it, and no TikTok lives. It's insane that we're being censored and we're, not seeing what's really going on.
In Spain, street clashes recast as Islamic violence. In Australia, a march calling for white Australians to assemble against traitors and foreigners, supported by neo. I mean, even South Park is calling us out. That's how crazy it's gotten.
I have no doubt that there are many, many Latinos in heaven.
Well, this is bad, okay?
Remember, only detain the brown one. If it's brown, it goes down. There's another one flying over here. Catch him, catch him.
How did you get into heaven?
I was really nice to people, and I helped various charities.
Look, I'm really sorry about this, but I'm just trying to make my nut.
All new kids, El Nombre. Line up and announce when your name is read. Martinez.
Aquí.
Broflovsky.
Here.
Broflovsky, is that an El Salvadorian name?
No, I'm Jewish.
What? How did a Jew get in here?
I'm just here because some fat, intolerant asshole didn't want me around.
But how did we get here? The truth is, here has been coming for a really long time. Roll back a few years and it's Brexit, the refugee crisis, the migrant crisis, the Windrush scandal.
A generation of Brits who came here as children have been facing the threat of deportation. They worked British jobs, they built British lives. But recently, some were denied healthcare, lost jobs, were detained and faced being thrown out of their country.
The fear was never too many people. It was always too many of the wrong people. And when life gets harder, when rents rise, wages stall, and hope runs thin after the pandemic that shall not be named, the scapegoat always comes back into focus. Immigrants distract the crowd while fat cat capitalists pocket the profits in the dark. But where did this script or this story come from? When did immigrant become a dirty word in nations built on immigration? And what is everyone really afraid of? Because today's immigration debate doesn't stand alone. It sits shoulder to shoulder with white supremacist talking points.
I can't understand you. Go back to your country, white power.
Carried through far-right networks, amplified by platforms that profit from rage. Christchurch, Buffalo, Hanau, Capitol Hill. Not accidents, not one-offs, but alarms wired together. Terror that travels through fiber optic cables, violence coded into algorithms, hatred live streamed straight into our living rooms. Until even YouTube, yes, Jubilee, I'm looking at you.
Do you care more about helping Americans or immigrants in this claim?
Immigrants are Americans. I'm an immigrant and an American.
Well, immigrants are not Americans. Americans are the people that were born
14th
here.
Amendment. Have you read it?
Okay, yes, I have. But are you understanding that the process of getting all these immigrants that come in here we've been also the millions of immigrants. It's up to the millions. It's the last 20 years now, and it has dramatically affected Americans here in the country, which
Positively,
people,
I would argue.
People like me and everyone around here, we cannot find homes or even get jobs within our own fields. It
You're
fires
looking for a
us.
job in
I
construction
am
or
not,
agriculture?
no.
I went to college.
Sits there debating whether some of us deserve the right to even exist. This isn't a random wave of hatred. It's a project, a managed panic. Parties, tabloids, tech companies all profit from a manufactured war on immigrants, a war of power and persuasion. And once the target lands on immigrants, it rarely stops with them. Trump's America is proving that right now.
We can't let our farmers not have anybody, these people, you can't replace them very easily. You know, people that live in the inner city are not doing that work. They're just not doing that work. And they've tried, we've tried, everybody tried. They don't do it. These people do it naturally. Naturally. What happens if they get a bad back? He said they don't get a bad back, sir, because if they get a bad back, they die.
God damn, that was racist.
But for me, immigration has never been this abstract concept. It's been my whole life. I was 4 years old when my family packed our lives into a single suitcase and flew to a country that we'd never seen. We weren't desperate, we were hopeful. A bag, a bet, and a belief in a better future. And that's what I want to get to the heart of in this video. Immigration isn't just about paperwork, passports, or legal categories of human versus illegal. It's a human story. A story of capitalism and colonial scars, of hope and loss, of trying to build an identity in a world that insists that you're the problem. That's why I'm making this video, to tell the other side of the story and to ask how immigrants became the world's favorite scapegoat. Oh, and if you're still here watching, first of all, thank you. And if you haven't already, hit like, subscribe, and the little bell so you don't miss out on a video. I would love for you to be part of the Aphrodisia family. In conversations about immigration, the same talking points show up on cue. Like clockwork. In fact, you've probably heard them before. I know you have. So before we go any further, we're going to put some of these common myths and misconceptions to the test. Because once you see how flimsy they are, you start to see what they're really hiding. And I don't just want to debunk them with numbers. I want to weave in the voices of people who've lived it. So I've enlisted some of my friends, family, lawyers, other immigrants, because the truth about migration isn't just found in statistics. It's in testimonies, in memories, in the everyday cost of being cast as the problem. So let's get into it. Myth 1, they're stealing our jobs. This one gets rolled out every election cycle like the greatest hit of fear-mongering. They're coming for your jobs. Why? Because it's simple. It gives people a villain. Pointing sideways is easier than looking up. When wages stall, rents climb, and unions are gutted, a scapegoat feels more satisfying and is a bit more easier to understand than a pie chart. But what happens when we actually look at the facts? Across rich countries, migrants make up nearly a fifth of the workforce, and we're concentrated in jobs that are low paid, dangerous, and essential. Care work, fruit picking, dishwashing, delivery driving, 12 hours on your feet, below minimum pay, warehouses that time your toilet breaks. And even allies reveal the bargain. On The View, Kelly Osbourne once said,
"If you kick every Latino out of this country, then who is going to be cleaning your toilet, Donald Trump?"
Oh, that's no.
In the sense that
She thought she was defending immigrants and migrants with this, but what she really did is spell out the hierarchy. Stay in your lane, do the work we don't want, and then maybe we'll tolerate you. Immigrants aren't stealing jobs. We're being exploited in them, and then blamed for that exploitation. Basically, it's a setup.
The thing about undocumented workers is they're really not taking jobs away from Americans who want the jobs. They're taking jobs that other Americans don't want. Because if they didn't, there wouldn't be jobs because the Americans would be in the jobs.
Because when people get angry, and they should, instead of looking up at CEOs dodging tax, at governments cutting support, they're told to look sideways. Blame the immigrant. Blame the brown person. Blame the cleaner, not the CEO. And this is propaganda. As we can see, it works. But numbers only tell part of the story. To bring context to these stats, I wanted to ground them in something more real. The perspective of somebody who has lived this contradiction every day. My mum. My mum moved countries not once, but twice, and built her life inside the very system these myths are written about. When I asked her what the dream of the West really looks like, she didn't hesitate.
My expectations of going to the UK is having a 9-to-5 job, having a lot of money left over for leisure time with the family, going out, enjoying that, having a good house, beautiful house. But when I got there, the reality was my job couldn't sustain my life. I was not able to see my children half as many times as I wanted. And to get any time for leisure, I would have to work extra hours so that we can enjoy a trip. I mean, if that was possible, I don't know. The reality was that there was no social interaction with people from my own country because everybody was busy trying to make ends meet. They were either working or sending the little money to help back home. The dream that we were sold that when we go to UK, literally paved, the streets are paved with gold, and the reality were totally different. And when you get entrapped in that kind of cycle, you don't know when to break the cycle, and you don't know where to go from there. Do you go back home? Do you stay there? Of course, there are very good things about the West, that like schools, opportunities, that you think about when you have children, and then you have to draw a balance. What is it that I'm wanting here? Do I sacrifice for my children so that they can get the best education and then go back home? But then when the time comes to go back home, what do you go back to? Because people have moved on. So you become entrapped in this Western life, which is glamorized from where we come from, back home, from Africa, and then feel like going back home is a failure, is admitting failure.
This is the immigrant contradiction. The dream is marketed as freedom, but the lived reality is something much darker. Audre Lorde once wrote that every society creates an underclass, a group marked less than to be used, exploited, and discarded so the system can run. For centuries, it was enslaved people, colonized people, women. Today, immigrants are slotted neatly into that role, and also Africa, but that's a whole other video. We're welcomed when our labor is needed, whether it's nursing the sick, coding in tech firms, or harvesting fruit, but denied dignity, security, or permanence. That's what keeps the hierarchy stable. And the whole irony of it, a lot of us were invited in. Post-war, Britain ran campaigns to recruit Caribbean workers, the Windrush generation, along with nurses, teachers, and laborers from across Africa and South Asia. They rebuilt the country, kept buses running and hospitals open. Yet, decades later, many of those same people were betrayed in the Windrush scandal.
I feel like an alien in this country. If I've worked and lived in this country for a long time and the Home Office would come and look at me and tell me that I've got no status in this country and I've worked and I've paid my tax.
Long-time residents suddenly told they didn't belong, denied healthcare, detained, and even deported. In Germany, it was Turkish guest workers. In the US, Mexican farm laborers were literally shipped through the Braquero program,
which allowed American businesses to hire thousands of temporary guest workers from Mexico. The Bracero program, established by the U.S. and Mexican governments in 1942, allowed Mexican nationals to legally enter the U.S. for up to 6 months to work as contract laborers, mainly on farms.
Governments opened doors when it suited the economy, then slammed them shut when we'd served our purpose. And then here's the second irony. Immigration doesn't drain industries, it keeps them alive.
Drastically cutting migration wouldn't protect Australia. It would tank our economy.
As my mum reminded me, immigrants provide a service none of the locals want to do. They prop up the system, and yet they're never appreciated the way white expats are.
Like they have this program in Ghana where they are trying to get people with a little bit of money to come to Ghana, and they give them free land so that they develop, and thus benefiting the local population because they're getting jobs, they're getting food, And these immigrants who are coming in, they are being worshipped for coming in. Whereas immigrants who are coming from the impoverished nations, they are providing a gap in the services, like, for example, these who are working in farms in the US, and these who are working in hospitality, these who are working in the health sector, they are providing a service that none of the indigenous people can provide, and yet they are not being appreciated in the same way.
That's the hypocrisy at the heart of the system. The people who save it are the same people scapegoated when it fails. After Brexit, fruit rotted in fields because there weren't enough pickers.
In 2017, there was a 12.5% shortfall in the number of seasonal workers that UK farmers rely on to pick their fruit. That led to some valuable produce being left to rot in the fields in some farms.
During COVID, migrants and immigrants kept hospitals, supermarkets, and deliveries running. Without us, economies don't function.
Britain couldn't survive without the labor of these people. Yet when times get rough, these are the same people who are propping up the most important facilities and public structures are always the ones that end up being demonized. Who are the essential workers?
And who died in masses when COVID hit?
Who nursed the British Prime Minister back to health? Immigrant nurses. And yet, when times get rough, those same people are always the ones who are demonized. And alongside my mum's perspective, I also wanted to hear from someone who works inside the system itself. Varsha, an immigration and criminal defense lawyer here in New Zealand. She sees both the law on paper and how it plays out in people's lives. When I asked her about the myth of job theft, she told me,
something my clients struggle a lot with coming here as refugees and migrants, trying to prove their worth in this country. I mean, we all talk about the glass ceiling in society, in the corporate world. And I think the sad part is that all these people come with such different experiences and such different stories and struggles that when they come here, none of the skills that they have been recognized for in their home countries where they're coming from is transferred or accepted in society here. And it's like when we look at migrants and we look at immigrants and when we look at all these people who are transcending borders to come and be here for whatever reasons, we box them into categories of where they can even exist in society, you know? And that is unfair to them because it's not giving them a fair and equal chance in society. We're not letting careers transfer over. We are not letting people's different experiences and stories transfer over here. And I think that is unfair to them. And that is something they all are deeply, deeply frustrated about, whether they come as a refugee or as a migrant with, you know, the skills that they think they have, but in this country they don't.
Her point really hit home for me because that happened to my dad. A CEO in my home country, Zambia, reduced to care home shifts in Britain. Years of training, whole careers, entire lives shrunk to whatever scraps the system thinks you deserve. Doctors become cleaners. Engineers become care workers. It's not that those jobs have no value. It's that people's skills, intelligence, and dignity are erased on arrival. It's a manufactured second class. And Varsha added,
I have seen the intergenerational impact of it as well, you know, and that is something that we don't talk about. By not letting these people come and have an equal place in society, an equal opportunity in society, not only are we stunting their personal growth as an individual, but you're restricting the growth of a family that comes with it, you know? And it translates into the opportunities the family receive coming here, the perspective society have of them here. Are they given an equal spot at our table? The answer is no, they're not. And it all comes down to the way they're viewed, you know?
And it doesn't stop with jobs. The same script gets dusted off for housing. They're stealing our houses. They're the reason rent's so high.
Immigrants are not the reason that our society is falling to pieces right now. The fact that there is shit pay, no jobs, and no housing is not a reflection of there being too many immigrants. It's a reflection of a government that refuses to negotiate with unions and that they refuse to negotiate and make their working conditions better. Say, oh, well, you guys can all go, and what we'll do is we'll open up immigration and we'll bring people from overseas to do those jobs at a tiny pay with terrible working conditions.
But it's not really about scarcity. It's about who is seen as worthy of belonging. My mom told me a story that made this really clear.
I was working during an operation with a British consultant who made a comment to say there was actually a black South African who had moved in the neighborhood, who had bought a house in the neighborhood, and everybody was up in arms to say the values of their homes will go down because nobody will want to live in that street because there's a black person, even though the black person was a doctor like them.
If it had been a white South African, it would have been fine. And when I brought this up with Varsha again, she connected it back to the system.
Something we always forget as a society is that law is shaped by society. And even if the law currently today is shaped by a very old society that feels very far reached from our generation, I definitely think that society influences law. So right now, and when I say society, I obviously am meaning the top 2% that controls everything, controls the systems, controls the finances in this country, controls the legal system, influences policy. That 2% shapes society. And that 2% right now is quite, not inclusive, to an extent right wing, and is very, very discriminatory towards their perspective of immigrants. And so naturally, the policies and legal systems we have in place make it harder for these people to find space and existence in our society,
Immigrants make an easy scapegoat because we can be blamed for shortages created by systems no one dares to question and no one really understands.
Everything is always your fault.
And the hypocrisy doesn't stop. In Australia, Hugh Leno, himself an immigrant from the US, fronts a family property empire that holds around 30,000 empty homes. They deliberately keep houses off the market to deliver shareholder value.
Hugo's wealth came entirely from the housing unaffordability crisis we are seeing in Australia today. When they were able to build homes and sell them for high prices, it meant bidding up prices for the rest of us. His trust fund, his tuition fees, his lifestyle, everything in his life has been paid off the back of the housing crisis. It's no wonder he wants to pretend to be extreme about immigration.
I'm obviously very extreme in the idea that I'm trying to really paint immigration as one of the key driving forces.
By one estimate, the business puts 30 times more pressure on housing than the average migrant household. Yet he's one of the loudest voices blaming migrants for the housing crisis in Australia and even encouraging people to join the anti-immigration march on the 31st of August, even though he's an immigrant himself.
Oswald's dad was an immigrant. That's right, in the 1980s he immigrated as a student to the UK and then he came back to Australia to join the property company Pete. If Ozpil was against all immigration, like he says he is, then surely he'd have a problem with his dad being a burden on the UK economy.
But it doesn't count, right? Because he's white and he's American. He prospers at the top while others are pushed to the bottom. Proof the system isn't about fairness, but who gets recognized and who gets reduced. So the myth of job-stealing immigrants survives not because it's true, but because it's useful. It's a magician's trick. While you're busy watching the cleaner, the fruit picker, the nurse, the delivery driver, the real theft is happening in boardrooms, in tax havens, in portfolios stacked with empty homes. And underneath all the myths and the statistics, there's the emotional cost. What it really feels like to live this story. As my mom put it,
we shouldn't forget that when we go to these countries, we become slaves of their system because we just sacrifice and learn and forget to live.
And that's the immigrant reality. Not job theft, not an invasion, but a trade. Our lives, our health, our dignity in exchange for survival in a system that was never built for us. In fact, it was built to exploit us. And that brings us to myth 2. They're illegal. Let's take a quick reality check here. Illegal immigrant is not a person. It's a political category. Illegal immigrant. Illegal alien, even just illegals. These aren't neutral terms, they're weapons. They turn migration, something deeply human, into a crime scene. They make people believe that crossing a border makes you a criminal. But that idea crumbles under the slightest pressure. The world has always been in motion. If crossing borders makes you a criminal, then every American is guilty because the whole country exists on stolen, migrated land. If we're gonna run with this illegal migration thing, then the first deportation notice goes straight to Christopher Columbus. No one is born illegal. You can't hold up a baby and say this one's a criminal. Governments draw lines on maps, pass laws around them, and then criminalize whoever crosses without permission. Cross the wrong border? Illegal. Overstay a visa by a few days? Illegal. Flee war without the right paperwork? Then yep, you guessed it, you're illegal. And what counts as illegal changes all the time depending on who the state wants to target. Jewish refugees fleeing the Holocaust were blocked by the US in the 1930s, labeled as undesirable. The Windrush scandal. Caribbean migrants invited to rebuild Britain who had lived and worked there for decades suddenly got recast as illegals. They were denied healthcare, they were fired, detained, deported to countries they barely remembered. Does that sound familiar? In the 1970s New Zealand, the Dawn raids targeted Pacifica families as overstayers, even though most of the overstayers were white tourists from the UK, the US, and Australia. And today, asylum seekers in small boats branded illegal, even though claiming asylum is a legal right under international law. The label shifts, the target shifts. The script stays the same. And the game is rigged from the start. Even the so-called legal routes aren't equal. I spoke to Varsha, the immigration and criminal defense lawyer I introduced earlier, and she put it pretty bluntly.
If you were to just simply read the way policy is written, it is in a very yes or no, black and white manner. And so in some instances, if it is applicable to a person who comes from a white Caucasian background, then yes, it should be applicable to the brown, black migrant. There should be no difference in the way they're treated. However, we forget that these policies and the laws are enacted by people who have bias. And so even if you just look at immigration, right? Let's take something like the working holiday visa that everybody loves. How many working holiday people have you seen from Europe in comparison to how many working holiday people have you seen coming from Latin America or Africa or South Asia? The answer is you don't know anybody from those backgrounds. The concept of it should be applicable to everybody, but they've restricted the visa being applicable to only certain countries. And most of those countries are European countries. And it's because they're scared of the immigration pathway they'd be opening up for those particular countries if they gave it to people coming from people of color, migrant backgrounds. And that already shows you that there is an incredible discriminative way of applying policy. And even if you just look at basic other visa categories that exist, right? You know, you've got a working visa and a visitor's visa, all these visas that exist, the processing rate and approval rate for European people coming from European white backgrounds is much higher than people who come from people of color backgrounds and come from the global south. And that already shows a massive discrimination in the way the policies are being exercised and how many visas are being processed per people. And so you can see that color does matter all of a sudden there, and the definition of a migrant and which kind of migrant makes a big difference, you know, because are you the good kind of migrant they want or the bad kind of migrant?
Which is actually like pretty day. Now let's move on to language. Words don't just describe, they reshape our perception. A study by the Runnymede Trust analyzing 63 million words in UK media and parliamentary debate found immigrants, especially immigrants of color, overwhelmingly linked with the label illegal. Not necessarily a legal status, but a stigma. And notice how the words themselves do the work. A white retiree in Spain is called an expat. A black nurse in London is an immigrant. A refugee is a migrant when the story needs pity, and illegal when the story needs blame. None of these words are neutral. They're labels handed out by power, deciding who gets welcomed and who gets scapegoated. Tabloids and news outlets scream about migrant swarms. Politicians warn of floods and invasions. TV loops footage of brown bodies in boats. Repeated enough times and it builds a frame in your head. Not neighbors, but pests, like people that need to be exterminated. This is how language softens us up for cruelty. Once migrants are cast as a threat, detention camps and deportations look like solutions. And it goes deeper than labels. Varsha reminded me that even intellect itself is measured by language.
I have to say the largest thing that all migrants have always, and migrants including refugees, asylum seekers, like every single aspect of one that you could think of, is the fact that in our society here today, English is the language that people use to measure your intellect. And that is the saddest part ever, because a lot of these people coming over are some of the most smartest people you might ever meet when it comes to certain aspects of life. But you will never find out, and we'll never give them a chance for that to be heard. As, bilingual, multi-language speakers, there's so much depth in other languages that English will just probably never have. So much of that gets lost with it as well.
Now, Stuart Hall, one of the most important cultural theorists of the 21st century, spent his life analyzing how media translates fear into common sense. He showed that words like illegal don't just describe, they encode political and economic anxiety into racialized fear. And those myths don't just shape headlines, they shape the law. And that's the thing, right? Words don't just sit on a page, they shape how we see, how we fear, how we punish. Call someone illegal and you erase their whole story. Repeat it enough times and you build a world where raids feel like justice and deportations feel like order.
Hi, Senator. Mia McCarthy with Politico. Question for you about the Haitian migrants in Springfield. So I know you've talked a lot about how we need to deport illegal aliens, but I wanted to ask you, the majority of the Haitians in Springfield came under TPS, so they are here legally.
Well, if Kamala Harris waves the wand illegally and says these people are now here legally, I'm still going to call them an illegal alien. An illegal action from Kamala Harris does not make an alien legal. That is not how this works.
So let's reframe this. Immigrants aren't illegal. Borders are. Deportations are. Raids are. When you criminalize movement, you criminalize survival. And once survival is criminal, punishment writes itself. That's how a word becomes a weapon. That's how a label becomes a system. Now on to myth 3. They don't want to assimilate. So on paper, the complaint is simple. Immigrants don't integrate. We don't blend in. We cling to language, to food, to customs. But what's really being said is this. You're meant to disappear. Assimilation isn't a cultural exchange, it's conditional belonging. I asked Varsha what that pressure looks like in practice, and she told me,
people's reasons are generalized, and stereotypes have been very harshly formed. And what's ended up happening because of that is you've got this one lens that's overshadowing and overcasting every other personal narrative that provides explanation and reason for why immigrants, migrants, why we move places, why they move places. And what is lost when the stereotype wins, which is what's seen through so much policy, is that these people's individual stories don't get heard, and the genuineness and rawness of their lives aren't accurately seen. And so it becomes so much harder to prove your existence and why you deserve a place at the table. People are forced into these one narratives that they have to be, and the immigrant story and the struggle and the reason and the morals behind all of it get lost because they aren't given space to exist and express.
The one narrative is the good immigrant, a grateful, hardworking, silent, never demanding too much space.
There's a good immigrant and there's a bad immigrant. And the good immigrant is the one that will assimilate and just camouflage themselves and be a part of society without even blinking twice. And people would have to look again to be like, oh yeah, you're actually not from here. But you've got the bad immigrants in society's perspective. There's the immigrant that looks different to them, speaks a different language to them, has different skills to them, has different cultural values to them or morals to them. All of that plays a big difference into the bad immigrant that they see.
And that's the real function of assimilation, not inclusion, but erasure. You can stay, but only if you shrink, only if you smooth out every edge of difference until you disappear into whiteness. And it almost always runs one way. Non-white, non-Western immigrants are expected to erase themselves, while white migrants get called adventurous. White people move to Spain and keep speaking English, buy up land in Bali and refuse to learn Bahasa, retire in Thailand and demand British breakfast. No one questions if they belong there. No one puts pressure on them to assimilate. Psychologist John Berry mapped 4 ways migrants adapt: assimilation, separation, integration, and marginalization. Western countries reward assimilation, erasing your culture to fit the majority.
Assimilation had not worked anywhere in the world as a matter of public policy.
But integration is different. Integration means keeping your heritage and engaging with a new culture. It's not about disappearing, it's about adding. And the research shows integration leads to the best outcomes for migrants and for the societies that they join. The problem is when immigrants aim for integration, it often gets misread as refusal. Speaking your language at home, cooking your own food, holding onto your traditions are all signs of healthy integration, and they're twisted into accusations of not fitting in.
If you move here, you should be moving here because you love our way of life and you want to integrate in it, not because you want to bring the culture of your country and put it on top of the one that already exists. And that's what's happening in these ghettoized communities.
And for so many of the immigrants I spoke to, whether they migrated at 4, 28, or 50, the same theme came up: the ache of never fully belonging. Especially in white majority countries where white immigrants can often slip in more easily, their proximity to whiteness buying them acceptance. For the rest of us, the gap never quite closes. This is something that my mum lived.
I was scrubbed with a doctor who had just, a consultant who had just moved in from London to the Northeast. And he looked up at me and said to me, "So when are you going back? Why are you here? When are you going back to your country? We are tired of seeing black faces in here. The Northeast black faces don't belong." And I had to be strong, and I answered him to say, "I will have you know that I am black by color, but I am a UK citizen just as you are. This is my country. Get used to me having me around." Having to justify your ground, it's not easy, and it's not for the faint-hearted.
Having to justify that you have a right to exist constantly.
And you are there legally. When I went to Australia, we were in the shopping mall. Somebody swore at me and said that.
Wow.
Said, "What are you doing here? Get out." And that was as recent as 2 years ago.
Wow.
This is what you as a parent wonder whether you have done the right thing by your children, because your children experience this on a daily basis. And do you think it's worth it? Moving to the UK was because I worked with British people and they were so nice to us when we were in our own country. I went to a British school and all my teachers were from Britain. A few were from America, but most were British, who had settled in my country. So you see the other side of them when you go to their land.
That's what assimilation really demands: constant justification of your right to exist, even as a doctor, even while saving lives. And then my friend Esther also had some words to say around this. School especially was quite hard, as all the stereotypes of immigrants from Africa were often used against me, which would sometimes make me feel shame for being an immigrant. The way the media depicts us like we just come in to take and never earn anything is so far from the truth. We work just as hard, if not harder, just to even get through the door. These stories remind us that assimilation isn't just about fitting in, it's about who has the luxury of belonging without question, and who is forced to prove themselves at every step.
There's a very subtle difference, between an immigrant and an expat. The easy way to say it is that immigrants are brown and black and expats are white, but that's too simple. It's too simple. It really is. You ever met a Polish person? They get sad too. You need to ask someone why they moved to a place to really know. An immigrant will say something like, I moved here because I got a job, or I was trying to get out of a bad situation back home, and I just wanted an easier life for myself or an easier life for my family. And an expat will say some shit like, I just heard the vibe was really chill.
My mom told me something else that stayed with me.
It's that misconception that life at home is not as good as life in the West. Who wants to wake up at 5 a.m. to go to work, and then when you finish that job, you go to another job, you don't get home until 11 p.m., and then you wake up the next day to do the same things all over? Where is the quality of life in there compared to home, where you wake up at your leisure, you have a backyard garden where you're able to grow everything, where you're able to keep your chickens, where you eat your food organically? and be able to interact with your relatives and friends, tell stories over a fire, which life is better.
And that's the other side of migration that people don't talk about. You don't just leave behind your house or your passport. You give up your family, your food, your traditions, the things that make you feel rooted. And then you're told that you're not supposed to miss them. You're supposed to give them up willingly just so people won't demonize you. But no one asks white migrants to give anything up. No one makes them change their language, their food, their culture. And the hypocrisy runs even deeper when you remember what the West has done through colonization, moving into other people's homelands and stripping them of their traditions, their language, and forcing assimilation at gunpoint in their home countries.
The idea of Great Britain was intimately tied to the fact that Britain's invaded almost every country on the earth. No, literally, there's a map, you can Google it. And so the idea of our greatness was intimately tied to this idea of empire, which was intimately tied to what Rudyard Kipling calls the white man's burden. Go and civilize all these stupid brown folks that have been writing and having civilizations for thousands of years, but let's forget all of that.
This is what John Berry's research really points to. Integration, keeping your heritage and engaging with your new culture is what leads to the best outcomes.
Cultural diversity is a public good. It's good for a society, it's good for the people to have the development and maintenance of diversity in their population. And at the same time, he proposed that diversity had to be accompanied by social inclusion. People had to have an opportunity to participate as culturally different people in the daily life of the society.
But for so many, like my mom, integration isn't even an option. The system pushes you towards assimilation instead. Erase yourself, cut your ties, and survive alone. And when you try and hold on, you're branded as the problem. White expats do this constantly. British retirees in Spain eat shepherd's pie. American tech bros in Bali hang out with other Americans. Kiwis in London cluster and clap. Nobody accuses them of failing to assimilate because whiteness isn't asked to accommodate. It expects to dominate.
You're not an expat, you're an immigrant. White people love to call themselves expats when actually they're immigrants because they have preconceived stereotypes and negative connotations and biases against immigrants, and because they're trying to hide their racism. Expat versus immigrant, these have real definitions. Like expat is if you go to another country for school or for work, but it's very temporary, you're gonna go back to your home country afterwards. And then immigrant is someone who has traveled to another country to start a new life there. I'm an immigrant, and I'll say that to people, and people will push back against that, like, on my behalf. They'll be like, no, you're an expat. And I'm like, no, like, I'm an immigrant.
I was 14 in school in New Zealand when I overheard some white boys muttering about how many Asians were in the class. And it wasn't really with anger, it was with anxiety. They were asking questions like, what if we're outnumbered? What if this place stops feeling like ours? And that moment really stuck with me because that's when I realized that it wasn't really about culture, it was about power. Not fear of culture clash, but a fear of no longer being the cultural default. And that brings us to myth 4, they're dangerous.
Wrong, wrong, wrong. This debate is both factually and morally wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. And 2 factual wrongs you will find already in the name of this debate. There is no mass migration to Europe. In fact, there is a 66% drop in the applications of asylum. And the second wrong is the EU-wide data shows that sexual violence is committed by EU nationals, by men who are known to the women in their own homes. The common denominator here is spelled M-E-N, men. That is where the wrong is. The far right are twisting facts into ignorant, hate-fueled portrayal of migrants. Correlation does not equal causality. Women rights organizations are rejecting your cynical weaponization of our pain for your racist agenda. I have my voice. Don't you dare claim to represent it.
Like many hotels across the country, this hotel behind me had become a vital shelter for asylum seekers coming to the country, many of whom have fled war and persecution at home, including countries such as Afghanistan, Syria, and Sudan. This should have been a safe haven for them, but instead, over the weekend, this became the target of violent and racist attacks by far-right rioters.
But But I think the more interesting question here is who's really under threat. The idea that immigrants or migrants are inherently violent is one of the most persistent and the most useful myths. It justifies border walls, detention centers, deportation flights. It whispers when your name's on a CV, when you walk through airport security. And I've even had times where people cross the road when they see me. Like, imagine me crossing the road. But the numbers don't back it up. In the US, immigrants, documented or not, commit crimes at lower rates than citizens. And this trend is consistent across other countries too.
White people. If crime statistics really mattered to us, we would be talking about white men every damn day. We as white people love to throw around statistics when it comes to the black community. We love to misconstrue data about poverty rates, crime rates, single-parent households. Here's the thing. If you really want to talk about problematic behavior in terms of statistics, we need to talk about white men. Most mass shootings in America, white men. School shootings, white men. Intimate partner violence, typically known as domestic violence, white men. Police brutality and systemic violence, white men. Online harassment and extremism, white men. Domestic terrorism, white men. Serial killers, white men. The demographic making up the vast majority of CEOs, judges, senators, and police chiefs who refuse to hold white men responsible, white men.
Well, Charlie Kirk's shooter ended up being a Republican white male. The shooter has been identified as Tyler Robinson, a 22-year-old that attended Utah University. This is him in 2017 with his Trump costume, and he was a registered Republican in Utah according to state records.
For 33 hours, I was praying that this had to happen here, that it wouldn't be one of us, that somebody drove from another state, somebody came from another country. Sadly, that prayer was not answered the way I had hoped for.
There is no casual link between immigration and crime. So no, immigrants aren't more dangerous, but we are more heavily policed, surveilled, and stereotyped. This myth sticks around not because it's true, but because it's useful. So who's really dangerous? Not to point the finger here, but while immigrants are cast as the threat, it feels like white supremacist violence is what's rising. For example, Christchurch 2019, 51 Muslims murdered in mosques. Buffalo, 2022, 10 black shoppers killed. Norway, 2011, 77 teenagers massacred. London, 2017, a van rammed into worshippers outside Finsbury Park Mosque. Different countries, same story. A narrative of replacement of immigrants as invaders. And it doesn't live only in dark forums. When Trump calls immigrants animals,
the 22-year-old nursing student in Georgia who was barbarically murdered by an illegal alien animal,
or Nigel Farage warns of a migrant invasion.
And unless we start deporting people, I predicted this would turn into, and yes, I use the word, invasion.
They're giving cover. They're building the scaffolding extremists climb into violence. And this is where what seems like random prejudice turns into ideology, and it kills. So no, immigrants are not the danger, but more often than not, we are the target. I was only 6 years old, walking home from school with my mum and my twin brother when a man spat at her and called her a black bitch and told her to go back to where she came from, go back to her home country. We had eggs thrown at our house. At 7 again, when I was walking home from school with my brother, older kids made monkey sounds at me and threw rocks at me. I had primary school teachers, elementary school, if you're in the US, telling me that if I drank a lot of milk, it would turn my skin lighter.
Hey, that was weird.
And when I was 14 in high school, again, walking home from school, people shot fireworks at me. And this is just a handful of some of the things that I had to go through on a daily basis. This is what racism feels like before you even know the word racism. Not being dangerous, but being in danger constantly. I always felt like my existence was a problem. And looking back, I realized that I spent a hell of a lot of my childhood scared of being attacked for just being the way that I am. I was in the UK during the London bombings, watching the news with my family. We sat there praying the attacker wouldn't turn out to be black because we knew what would be waiting for us the next day. You end up living in a state of constant vigilance, bracing yourself for how strangers will look at you and what they'll assume and what they'll say, because when a black person offends, suddenly every black person is made to answer for it. And the same goes for other minorities. And that's the real trick of racism. Not just who gets cast as dangerous, but who is excused from danger altogether. When a black person commits a crime, the whole race is indicted.
So more footage was just released of Irina Zaretska, the Ukrainian woman who had her life ended on a subway in Charlotte, and it just gets even sadder. This is the footage immediately after she was attacked and stabbed in the neck. So it looks like the man in the gray immediately gets up and walks away, walking right past Irina without saying a word or even checking on her. Right after, this lady and this man also get up and leave, and the two people in the back seem to stay put, but not a single person went to help her.
Here we are again. Here we are again.
When a white man commits mass murder, the story is rewritten. He was lonely. He was misunderstood. He was a lone wolf wandering on his own.
Treating this for what it is. It's a lone wolf terrorist attack.
So if immigrants change culture, then Britain's crown is living proof. The monarchy itself is an immigrant project. America itself is an immigrant project. That's the point. Culture has always been a remix. What people call white culture often turns out to be everyone else's culture repackaged. And the only thing holding it together is the power to claim ownership. The issue isn't that immigrants are changing culture, it's that we're not allowed to own the culture that we help create. They love the flavor, just not the people. Immigrant culture is praised only when it's stripped from immigrant people. When was the last time you went to yoga, huh? When was the last time you got a matcha? When the outfit is rebranded as the Coachella aesthetic, when the slang makes it onto TikTok, but not when you're mocked for having an accent, when the sound of dancehall Afro beats or drill charts, but the communities who build them are criminalized. They want the food, not the family. The outfit, not the auntie. The dance, not the diaspora. They want the poos, not the habadanda. Okay, I'll stop with the slam poetry. You get the point. This isn't about cultural protection, it's about control. And here's what people forget. There was never such a thing as pure culture in the first place. Britishness, Americanness, Australianness, whatever name you give it, are already hybrids built through colonization, slavery, trade, migration, and movement. You can't build an empire, plunder half the globe, and then act shocked when the world turns up at your door.
Breaking update. France's government is on the verge of collapse and the crisis is shaking Europe to its core. It's not just France, the United Kingdom is also staring down the same path. Here's the part most people don't know. For decades, 14 African nations were forced into an arrangement that sent up to 80% of their yearly revenues straight to France. That deal kept France afloat for over 50 years. But times have changed. Countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, and Senegal have expelled France, cutting off Paris from the very resources that kept its economy stable.
And in settler nations like the US, Australia, and New Zealand, these are immigrant projects built on stolen land. Colonizers weren't asked to assimilate, they were the ones demanding assimilation, and at gunpoint. So when politicians say immigrants today must protect the culture, what they really mean is protect white dominance. Because if everyone's an immigrant, then who gets the monopoly on deciding which culture counts? They say we're changing culture, but all we're doing is revealing what it's always been. Mixed, borrowed, stolen, and shared. All right, so we've been through the myths, but what does this actually look like IRL? Let's take Bob Katter, the longest serving MP in Australia.
And I punch blokes in the mouth for saying that.
80 years old, known as the father of the house. And in August 2025, pretty recently, he called a press conference in Brisbane where he waved the Australian flag and threw his full support behind the so-called March for Australia rallies built on anti-migration sentiment. He also demanded lists of pro-Palestine protesters so that they could be deported. But when a journalist asked him about his own Lebanese heritage, the fact that his grandfather immigrated from Lebanon in 1898, Katter loses it.
You've got Lebanese heritage yourself?
Oh, mate, don't say that, because that irritates me, and I punch blokes in the mouth for saying that. Don't you dare say that. My family have been in this country for 140 years. right? So and if you say anything like that, I have on many occasions punched blokes in the mouth, right? So I'm restraining myself today. I'm an Australian. My family have been here since the dawn of time. That's the end of it. Don't say that. Don't say that because you're a racist.
And what I found interesting about this is Kata's entire performance is about defending real Australianness by excluding others. But his family story is exactly what he's rallying against. The only way to resolve that contradiction is through erasure. Pretend the suitcase never existed. Pretend the journey never happened. Pretend that 140 years is the same as forever.
No, I don't think I will.
See, this is all about proximity to whiteness. Lebanese Australians haven't always been considered fully inside the national story in Australia. They were racialized as outsiders and criminalized and treated as a threat. You know, the same old story. But time, assimilation, and power can rewrite those narratives. And Kata's anger at having his heritage mentioned shows how fragile that rewrite really is. To belong, he has to distance himself from Lebanon, from migration, from the very history that made his Australian possible.
And I punch blokes in the mouth for saying that.
So what do we see? A man waving a flag, demanding deportations, trying to punch away his own family's history. And that's the truth of nationalism. It only works if you forget how your people got here. And that's why he's angry, because at the end of the day, he's an immigrant too. And years of whitewashing isn't going to change that. The good immigrant. Now, we've touched on this concept already in this video, but I wanted to talk about this in a bit more detail because it's important. Every immigrant knows this rule, even if we've never named it. Be grateful, work harder, and don't complain. It's not loud violence, but quiet discipline. Every grade, every job, every smile is a test that you can't afford to fail. Because as an immigrant, you're never just yourself. You become a symbol, a stand-in for millions. If you succeed, you redeem your people. If you stumble, you confirm the stereotype. What I'm talking about here is the myth of the good immigrant. The one who starts a business, works twice as hard for half the pay, raises perfect assimilated children, never causes trouble. A figure whose worth is always tied to productivity, useful but never fully human. The myth isn't really about us, it's about what others need from us. Belonging becomes conditional, acceptance becomes transactional. We're allowed to exist, but only if we're exceptional. Only if we overperform. I know that pressure too well. Growing up, I felt like I had to be perfect just to exist. I wasn't just living, I was proving that I deserved to be here, proving that I wasn't the stereotype that everyone expected me to be. And it wasn't just strangers that I was performing for, it was my parents too. I wanted them to believe that their sacrifices, everything that they'd given up was worth it, that the racism, the rejection, the nights they came home tired and unrecognized hadn't been for nothing. That I could turn their struggle into proof that we belonged here. And that's the hardest part as an immigrant, as a Black woman. You don't just get to be yourself. Every choice, every mistake, every stumble becomes bigger than you, a reflection of your family, your community, and your whole race. And that's the thing about the good immigrant story. It doesn't just weigh on you, it eats whole families. It's not just grades and jobs, it's decades of sacrifice. You trade in your roots, your rest, your sense of home just to prove that you belong. And that sacrifice becomes so normal that you almost forget to ask if it's even worth it. And even the category of good immigrant has layers. It doesn't just separate the useful from the disposable, it also divides the worthy refugee from the unworthy one. Varsha told me.
And then the desirable refugee and the non-desirable refugee, it very much exists as well. Desirable refugee is a young, child that the country can immediately jump into its white savior complex for, in comparison to like an elderly, Muslim man. Like, no one's desiring refuge for that elderly Muslim man, but they both are fleeing from the same fear of being persecuted and danger for their life, right? But like the way society views them is completely different. And I think the things that shape it are so much associated to what countries you come from. What do you look like them? Do you not look like them? Do you sound like them? Do you not sound like them? Are you willing to assimilate? An integrated society is too much to ask for, apparently. but are you willing to assimilate? Are you willing to change all your values and the way you speak, talk, act, behave, and think to fit in? And that expectation is harmful because we don't give space for diversity, which is really and truly what migrants really bring, you know, and that like range of culture, language, linguistics, art, thinking, like way of life, like you'll never find it anywhere else in any other society if it wasn't for the story of migrants.
And my friend IJ, who wrote her master's thesis on West African migration in South Africa, explained how this demand for performance is more than personal, but systemic as well.
The movement of people has been weaponized by governments and socio-political structures. And I wrote my master's thesis on specifically like West African migrants in South Africa. I feel like that dynamic can apply anywhere where you have a country, quote unquote colonial settler country, right? Where the ability to produce labor for these infrastructures is limited by what the quote unquote original population is able to do. And so it becomes this like covert way of extractivism where people are still required to contribute to these violent structures because of like the history that these Western countries may have had in their countries of origin, where they're now forced or due to other reasons are now, you know, moving or migrating, right? And then there's this pressure, I feel, for migrants because of how media plays a role in government, with like the National Party being in power, for example. It's like now there needs to be proof as to why migrants are good, right? So you'll see in the news cycle of like, oh, this migrant opened this business and they've contributed this to the community and they have this positive impact, where the humanity of the foreigner always needs to be justified in relation to the labor that they're contributing and not simply for existing. And then on the flip side of that, you have where a country's where you want to sort of like prove like negativity and things like that. The binary side of that is that they are now the scapegoat or the justification as to why things are the way they are, whether it's like rising crime levels or like inadequate access to like basic needs, you know. Then like soul stories will be like put forward of like a bad apple case kind of thing, you know?
If we take a look at what's happening in South Africa, it shows how deadly that conditional belonging can become. Violence against migrants isn't just this random thing. It recurs again and again, usually targeting African migrants, Zimbabweans, Nigerians, Malawians, Somalians, and Congolese. They're accused of taking jobs or driving crime.
They hate us too much. Why? We don't know. We don't know. Because we are not taking their job, we are not taking anything. We are just hustling by ourselves. We don't know where they are against us.
You know, the truth of the matter is that the average person in South Africa, which makes up the majority of the population, thinks how they want him to think. Now, who is they? The media, social media, our people are consumed and controlled in the way they think. That's why they will make them think that the person from Zimbabwe who is a maid in your house, he is foreign labor, or she is foreign labor. But the Chinese coming in is not. It's an elite group.
But the real roots of unemployment and poverty lie in apartheid's economic legacy, corruption, staggering inequality. Migrants are just the most visible scapegoats in that region. So we start to see how these things don't just happen in Western countries, but the same patterns also exist in the global South. And in South Africa, when the demand to be useful collapses into the accusation of being harmful, shops are looted, businesses are burned, people are beaten or killed in the street. And it's the same logic behind Britain's hostile environment and the Windrush scandal that we've talked about, and tabloid headlines around migrant swarms. They're different contexts, but it's the same message. Our humanity is always conditional. Our right to exist is always up for negotiation. And those negotiations don't stay abstract. They travel from tabloids to parliaments to online forums, and sometimes straight into a gunman's manifesto. Behind every slur, every border wall, every torchlit march, there's a bigger machine at work. The global white fear machine. And its loudest fuel today, the great replacement theory. People don't move at random. They move for work, safety, family, opportunity. Migration has causes, patterns, and histories. But alongside these realities, another story has been written. One that insists that movement isn't natural, but an attack. Christchurch 2019, El Paso 2019, Norway 2011, Buffalo 2022, different countries, different victims, yet in the attacker's own words, in manifestos uploaded to forums, in live streams broadcast online, in comment sections that had festered for years, the same phrase repeats itself. The Great Replacement. So what is it? At its core, the theory is the belief that white people are being deliberately replaced by non-white immigrants, a kind of so-called white genocide. It frames immigration and changing birth rates not as social patterns, but as an organized plot. And this isn't some fringe corner of the internet. In the US, about 1 in 3 adults say they believe some version of the theory. Nearly 2/3 of Republicans do. In France, over 60% of people told pollsters that they think the Great Replacement could even happen. In Ireland, more than 20% said that they believe that white people are being replaced by immigrants. These aren't tiny numbers. They show just how mainstream this fear has become. The phrase itself was popularized by French writer Renaud Camus in his 2011 book Le Grand Replacement. But the fear is older. Colonial era obsessions with population control, Nazi race science, and centuries of scapegoating dressed in new language. Its logic is simple and poisonous. Your culture, your nation, your bloodline is under attack, and immigrants are the weapon. In reality, migration doesn't follow conspiracies, it follows the legacies of empire. Pull of jobs, the push of war, and poverty, often created by the very nations now crying invasion. But the theory's danger isn't in its accuracy, it's in its emotional charge. It hands young white men in freefall a ready-made story, one that crowns them as defenders of a homeland and gives them someone to blame for their loneliness, their failure, and their rage. It doesn't just stay locked in the darkest corners of the internet. The language of replacement seeps into political speeches, media talking points, and even advertising dog whistles.
Help America's youth. Be a friend. Be a mentor. Just be there.
Dressed up as concern for heritage or tradition. When American Eagle ran a campaign with Sydney Sweeney under the tagline, Great Genes.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
Sydney Sweeney has very genes.
It was meant to be cheeky wordplay until you remember that good genes has long been a eugenics slogan.
But just so we're clear, this is not me telling you to buy American Eagle jeans.
Sydney Sweeney has very genes.
You see what I did there, right?
And the irony, denim in America was popularized by the labor of enslaved black people. Now, that's how white supremacy works. It sells fear as lifestyle and nostalgia as identity and uses immigrants as the scapegoat every time the system needs a villain. So what's fueling this violence? The Great Replacement, it finds hosts, almost always young or middle-aged white men.
You're goddamn right.
Who carry its poison from browser to bullet. Their lives look different on paper, but the arc repeats itself. Isolation, immersion online, a manifesto, and then devastating mass violence. Anders Breivik, Norway, 2011. He spent years locked in extremist forums, feeding on fear until he stitched together a 1,500-page rant about cultural suicide. He planted a car bomb in Oslo, then marched into a youth camp and murdered 77 people, mostly teenagers. His manifesto became the blueprint. Brenton Tarrant, New Zealand, 2019, 28, a drifting Australian gym rat with no clear future. He strapped a GoPro to his chest, stormed 2 Christchurch mosques during Friday prayers, and murdered 51 worshippers. Live streamed onto Facebook. His manifesto was literally titled The Great Replacement. He posted it to 4chan and live streamed the massacre, turning murder into media. Patrick Crusius, El Paso, 2019, 21, a lonely dropout. He drove across Texas to a Walmart and opened fire, killing 23 people, most of them Mexican or Mexican American. He copied entire passages from Tarrant's, proof that each attack becomes both imitation and escalation. Hanau, Germany, 2020. A 43-year-old recluse convinced his country was overrun, walked into 2 shisha bars and killed 9 people of migrant background. Peyton Grendon, Buffalo, 2022. Just 18. Radicalized on 4chan, planned on Discord, live streamed on Twitch. He drove hours to a black neighborhood supermarket and killed 10 shoppers. His manifesto was a remix of Breivik, Tarrant, and Crucius, showing how the ideology now circulates like a meme. These men weren't lone wolves, as the media likes to suggest. They were men in freefall. Failed students, failed workers, drifting sons. Replacement theory played on that emptiness. It handed them an identity, a script that crowned them defenders of a civilization under siege. It gave them what their own lives couldn't: belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of power. But that power only existed by naming an enemy, by turning us into shadows so that they could step into the light. That's why their violence feels so theatrical. Massacres staged for livestream, manifestos copied and pasted like fanfiction, each killer remixing the last. This is the horror of replacement ideology. It recycles. It takes men with nothing to live for and gives them something to kill for. Not lone wolves, a pack, not of blood, but of broadband.
Did we just become best friends? Yup!
And this isn't distant history. It's unfolding under the same blue skies and rising rents that we live beneath. On August the 31st, a new anti-immigration march called March for Australia was planned nationwide.
He's a dog. He's a dog. The dogs are the people of the country.
We are Australians! And we are proud! And we are angry!
Let's get our country back.
Its slogans, Australia first, stop mass migration now, echo the same old chants. Organizers claim that it was called a peaceful protest, but extremists like Thomas Sowell have been promoting it in Telegram groups, urging white Australians to assemble against traitors and foreigners.
Final speaker for today is Thomas Sowell. Today our men stood in the front of the march, and when the Palestinians and the communists came charging at the Aussie flags, it was our men that fought back. Australia is in a fight for its survival. It might not be bullets and guns and bombs. It may be hearts and minds and information. And everything that we do is for Australia. It's for our nation. I'm not asking you to agree with me on everything. What I'm asking you to respect is that we need to put fighters at the front. I get asked all the time, what does it mean to be Australian? People ask me about pieces of paper, and I say to them that Australia is not a passport, it's not a piece of paper, it is a folk, it is a people, it is born, it is bred, and it belongs to us. Australia is beset on all sides by ginormous empires of the third world. We don't have to hate these people or set them up as our enemy. But there are 1.4 billion Chinamen and 1.4 billion Indians, and there are billions of other people in this world, and they all have a nation. They all have a home. And if we allow ourselves to be replaced and displaced in this land, if we do not maintain our demographics, if we do not stop immigration, then our death is certain.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
TikTok and Twitter, X, and social media was used to amplify it, proving how the architecture of radicalization, manifesto, livestream, march has migrated from screen to street. So what fuels all of this? Not a grand ideological awakening, but a startling reality. Life feels unaffordable, mostly because it is for the vast majority of us. To use Australia as an example, since we're already talking about Australia, in this context, wages Wages have crept past $2,000 a week, yet housing and food prices have gone up. Rents in Sydney are at record-breaking highs, with groceries up 11%. Home ownership is out of reach without six-figure incomes. Families commute for hours, move into caravans, skip meals, skip healthcare. Similar things are happening worldwide. But the blame is funneled at immigrants. Politicians insist that migration is the housing crisis.
In its first 2 years, the government brought in 1 million people through the migration program. That's 70% more migrants than in any 2-year period in Australia's history. And of course there'll be consequences. And yet after 3 years in power, the Albanese government hasn't delivered a single additional new home built under its failed housing policies. Australians are generous and welcoming people, but they want migration to be sustainable and the government to be in control of it. Labor is neither in control of migration, nor has it kept migration at sustainable levels, and Australians know it. I don't want young Australians locked out of the property market or having to rely on the bank of mum and dad. I want to see fewer Australians homeless and more Australians in homes. Mr Speaker, under Labor, migration will continue to put pressure on housing, on infrastructure and on services. But under the Coalition, we will cut the migration intake to free up housing and restore the great Australian dream of home ownership. We will cut the permanent migration program by 25%. We will ban foreign investors and temporary residents from purchasing existing Australian homes for a period of 2 years. We will set stricter caps on foreign students to relieve stress on rental markets. And we will invest $5 billion in essential infrastructure to get stalled housing projects up and going.
But the data says otherwise. It's decades of investor-friendly tax policies, negative gearing, capital gains discounts, coupled with strangled supply in speculative markets.
Since 2016, Australia has built nearly 1.6 million dwellings, and in the same time frame, total households, which both includes domestic growth and immigration, has risen by 1.47 million. This means that we have an excess supply of housing, but there are more caveats we can add. 20% of these households own more than one property, many of which hold empty properties. In Metro Melbourne alone, there are 100,000 empty properties, or a vacancy rate of 4.85%. If we extrapolate that to Australia broadly, we get over 500,000 empty properties across the country. Likewise, Melbourne in 2019 had a commercial vacancy rate of 10.9%, which across Australia adds up to 130,000 properties. So while, yeah, it's a very rough calculation, no matter how you put it, we've built way more homes to accommodate the amount of people coming in, which means this isn't necessarily a scarcity problem, but more a distribution problem. The system isn't distributing homes to people who need it. We've got the resources, we've got the ability to house everyone and more in this country, yet we can't. If you're curious, the fact that the housing crisis in this country is not caused by immigration is something reaffirmed by the academic literature. While, like many things, there is an impact on price growth by incoming immigrants, the impact is not nearly large as many would suggest.
Migrants aren't driving the squeeze, investors are. Replacement theory thrives in this vacuum, offering a racial conspiracy where there really should be a class analysis. So what does this all mean? People know they're being squeezed. You know, rent slips, grocery receipts, empty cupboards. And when leaders won't name the system they create and perpetuate, they sell a scapegoat instead. And that's how economic despair curdles into cultural despair. We can't afford life anymore becomes they're replacing us and the immigrants are to blame. Not because people believe conspiracies, but because someone told them to look for a villain and someone pointed at migrants. If white fear is the story shouted the loudest, then empire is the story silenced underneath it, the real reason why people move. So why do people move in the first place? We've been talking a lot about migration, but it isn't random. It isn't people flooding in on a whim. Migration has causes, history, systems, the way power was built and who it was built off the backs of. But that's not the story most people hear. And when nuance disappears, existence itself has to be proved. Now, a while back, a small island in the North Atlantic once decided that greatness meant bossing everyone else around. That island, Britain. And it wasn't alone. France, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, the Netherlands all joined in. Together, Together, they carved up continents, nicked resources, redrew borders, broke languages, and shipped labor wherever they fancied. What they left behind were not thriving democracies, but economies in tatters, politics on fire, and fault lines that are still cracking today. Colonization was mass migration, just not the kind you're supposed to complain about. Settlers didn't queue at embassies, they arrived with soldiers, clipboards, and renaming ceremonies. They cleared people off land, renamed it, and built fortunes on slavery, indenture, and convict labor. Migration was fine as long as it flowed out of Europe. And when empire needed patching up, colonies were called on again. The pattern: need workers, invite them in, politics shift, recast them as the enemy. Blame the worker, not the bosses, not the system. Migration today isn't an invasion, it's empire in reverse. Indians in Britain, Algerians in France, Filipinos in the US, Pacific Islanders in New Zealand. You can't drain countries for centuries and then act shocked when the bill shows up at your door. Take the Democratic Republic of Congo. On paper, it's one of the richest places on earth. Cobalt, coltron, diamonds, copper, the resources that power Western civilization. Jewelry, smartphones, Teslas, even the smartphone that you're watching this video on. But look closer and families are displaced from homes so minds can expand. Children as young as 7 dig through toxic pits with bare hands. Pregnant women carry heavy loads of ore for miles. Men spend 12-hour shifts in narrow tunnels that collapse without warning. All of this for pennies a day, while tech giants make billions selling the devices those minerals fuel. And much of this mining isn't just exploitative, it's illegal. Armed groups run shadow mines using violence and terror to control territory. Locals are extorted, enslaved, and sometimes killed if they refuse. Villages are left in ruin. Rivers are poisoned. Generations are destabilized. Belgium's colonial rule may have ended in Congo in 1960, but the extraction never stopped. Today it's carried out by multinational corporations, foreign governments, and militias alike. The wealth still flows north, the suffering stays local. And Congo is not an exception. Iraq's oil, Afghanistan's lithium, Nigeria's crude, the Pacific Islands drowning in climate change they didn't cause. The pattern repeats. Resources flow out, profits flow up, and the fallout, war, famine, floods, poverty, forces people to move. The same nations who lit the fire build walls and sneer, "Why are you even here?"
Who put you on the planet?
Ugh. Migration isn't leeching off the West. Migrants keep hospitals open, staff schools, pick fruit, drive deliveries, build entire economies, all while sending money home, while navigating systems stacked against them, while navigating racism. The truth is, migration is the West's unpaid bill and its unpaid labor. We contribute every day, yet we are treated as disposable. Now, all of that history isn't just abstract historical context, it lands in a single life. Britain needed my parents. Their labor kept its services afloat. But in daily life, we were treated as intruders. That contradiction, needed but hated, is what immigration really feels like. It's not one attack, it's not one slur, it's the drip, drip, drip of hostility until it rewrites how you see yourself. Immigration isn't just moving countries, it's learning 1,000 silent rules for survival, while knowing the game was rigged against you long before you arrived. I know that story because I've lived it. I was born in Zambia. I grew up in England. I moved to New Zealand at 14. Now I'm 28. On paper, our migration looked tidy. Middle class, English speaking, a nurse and a degree holder, moving to a country that promised safety and opportunity. We weren't fleeing war, we were chasing possibility. The glossy brochure version of the West. Tidy streets, good schools, the idea that if you worked hard enough, the ladder would be there to climb. The reality was a lot colder. There were moments of hate, neighbors, classmates, strangers that constantly told us that we didn't belong, and yet ours is still seen as one of the good stories. My mom ended up earning a master's. All of my parents' children are educated. My parents worked enough to eventually be able to return to their home country, Zambia.
Oh, thank God.
But even then, it wasn't easy. Now our family is scattered. My siblings live in different countries, my parents elsewhere, all of us, holding multiple passports. We've become what they call global citizens. But really, it just means that home is everywhere and nowhere all at once. That's what immigration feels like. Not just struggle, but survival, shaping you, testing you, and almost breaking until the only choice left is to see things differently, to question, to resist, to keep building anyway, to make videos like this. Conclusion time! Immigration isn't a war between those who belong and those who don't. It's a war on truth. And the truth is always this. We've always belonged. Belonged in the fields and the factories that keep nations alive. Belonged in the classrooms, in the hospitals where futures are built. Belonged in the cultures that we've shaped. The food, the music, the language, the lifeblood of the West itself. Immigrants aren't the threat. The threat is a system that exploits us while blaming us. Landlords hoarding empty homes while rents skyrocket. Governments cutting support and pointing the finger sideways. Corporations thriving on our labor while scapegoating the very workers they depend on. BlackRock. And yet it's us who are turned into slogans, into shadows, into monsters in someone else's horror story. But if you look closer, immigrants don't erase culture, we carry it, we multiply it, we make it new. We don't weaken nations by arriving, we reveal what they could be if they chose courage over fear. The lie says that we're replacing you. The truth is, the real replacement is happening in plain sight. Fear replacing truth, power replacing justice, hate replacing humanity. And maybe that's what I really wanted to say with this video, to bring the humanity back into the conversation, to tell the truth of migration as somebody who's lived it, whose whole life has been shaped by it, and who's tired of watching my story reduced to headlines, sound bites, and hates, and us versus them. There's so much more that I could say about this whole subject because the immigrant experience is layered beyond measure. My story is just one of millions. Layered, painful, hopeful. But if this video shifted your perspective even just a little bit, I hope that you carry that into the world. Immigration isn't somebody else's story. It's all of our stories, and that's something that I want everyone to remember. I hope that this video made you see things a little bit differently. Thanks so much for watching. I know this video was a heavy one and I've shared a lot of my story today, but I would love to hear yours too. So share your thoughts in the comments, your own experiences with immigration, or what this video made you reflect on. Nice! And I haven't done this before, but I have a perks program. I'm still trying to figure out how to use it on YouTube, but I do really want to say to everyone, I really appreciate you for just supporting and, donating every month. All of that stuff helps me be able to do what I do better and make these videos even better. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys.